Look, I know what you're thinking. Time travel sounds like total BS, right? But I'm standing here in my trashed lab at 3 a.m., staring at security footage that shouldn't exist, and I gotta tell you this story before I lose my mind. What I discovered 3 weeks ago wasn't just some breakthrough in physics, it was proof that I'd screwed up in ways I never imagined possible. And the worst part is, I can't undo it, because the person who did it isn't me anymore. My name's Dr. Ryan Chen, and yeah, I'm one of those crazy basement scientists you hear about on podcasts. For the past 6 years, I've been working on temporal displacement theory out of my garage in Portland, burning through my divorce settlement and what little savings I had left. My ex-wife Linda used to call it my midlife crisis project, but honestly, it was the only thing keeping me going after she took the kids to Seattle. The neighbors thought I was building some kind of doomsday device with all the equipment deliveries, but really, I was just a washed-up MIT dropout trying to prove he wasn't a complete failure. The machine itself was pretty simple in concept, even if the execution nearly killed me twice. I'd built a cylindrical chamber about the size of a phone booth, lined with electromagnetic coils that could generate a stable quantum field. The theory was that if I could create a localized distortion in spacetime, I could send small objects backward or forward by a few seconds, maybe minutes if I was lucky. Everyone said it was impossible, that the energy requirements alone would bankrupt a small country, but I'd found a workaround using recycled particle accelerator parts and some sketchy calculations I'd made at 2 a.m. The first real test was on a Tuesday night, September 12th, and I decided to start small with a coffee mug. I placed it in the chamber, set the temporal displacement for exactly 10 seconds into the past, and hit the button. The machine hummed to life. The lights in my entire house dimmed, and for a moment I thought I'd blown every fuse in the neighborhood. Then the mug vanished, and 10 seconds later, it reappeared in the exact same spot, still warm to the touch, and I nearly passed out from excitement. I ran the test 17 more times that night with different objects, a pen, my watch, a sandwich I'd been eating. Every single time, the object disappeared and reappeared exactly when and where it should. Proof that localized time travel was actually possible. I documented everything with 3 different cameras, took measurements, recorded energy readings, and filled up 2 entire notebooks with observations. This was it. This was my Nobel Prize, my redemption. The thing that would make my kids proud to say their dad was a scientist. But here's where I made my first mistake. I got cocky. I started thinking bigger, wondering what would happen if I increased the displacement time from seconds to minutes or even hours. The math got complicated real fast, and I spent the next week running simulations on my computer, trying to figure out safe parameters. My calculations said that a 1-hour displacement would require about 3 times the power, which was pushing it, but still technically possible with my setup. On September 19th, I decided to go for it with my neighbor's cat that kept crapping in my yard. I lured the cat into the chamber with some tuna, sealed the door, and programmed the machine for a 60-minute displacement. The cat looked at me through the glass with those judgmental eyes cats have, and I remember thinking this was either going to make me famous or get me arrested for animal cruelty. I hit the button, and this time the machine sounded different, angrier somehow. The electromagnetic field flickered and pulsed in ways it hadn't before, and the cat started yowling like crazy inside the chamber. Then everything went white, a blinding flash that left spots in my vision, and when I could see again, the chamber was empty. I checked my watch, waited exactly 60 minutes, and sure enough, the cat reappeared, completely fine but seriously pissed off. That's when things got weird, and I mean really weird. I reviewed the security footage from that hour, trying to understand what had happened during the displacement. The timestamp showed the 60 minutes during which the cat had been displaced, and everything looked normal at first. But then, at around the 40-minute mark, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was movement in the lab, shadows shifting near the equipment, like someone was in there with the cameras rolling. I rewound the footage and watched it frame by frame, my hands shaking as I gripped the mouse. At timestamp 43 to 27, a figure appeared in the corner of the frame, partially obscured by shadow. It was a person, definitely human-shaped, wearing what looked like some kind of protective suit or hazmat gear. The figure moved slowly through my lab, examining equipment, touching things, and at one point it stopped directly in front of the main camera and looked up. The face behind the helmet visor was mine. Not exactly mine, but close enough that there was no mistaking it. This was me, or some version of me, 10 years older at least. The other me had a scar running down the left side of my face, gray streaks in my hair, and this haunted look in my eyes that made me want to throw up. He stared at the camera for a solid 30 seconds, then walked back into the shadows and disappeared. I must have watched that footage 100 times that night, trying to convince myself it was a hoax or a hallucination. But the timestamps were continuous, there were no cuts or edits, and the figure interacted with real objects in real time. This was proof that my machine had done something way beyond just displacing the cat. It had somehow created a window or a bridge that allowed something or someone to cross over. And that someone was a future version of me. The next morning, I noticed things in my lab had been moved. My notebook was open to a different page, showing equations I definitely hadn't written. Tools were rearranged in ways that made more sense ergonomically, like someone with more experience had optimized my workspace. There was even a fresh coffee cup on my desk, still slightly warm, with a sticky note attached that read, "Check the particle harmonics, you're off by 3.7 degrees. I followed the note's advice and recalculated my field equations. And holy crap, I had been off by exactly 3.7 degrees. Fixing it would have prevented some serious energy bleed and made the whole system about 40% more efficient. But how did future me know that? And more importantly, why was he here helping me instead of just telling me to stop? Over the next week, I kept running tests, each time recording everything and checking for temporal anomalies. Every single test resulted in the same thing. During the displacement window, future me would appear in the lab, moving around, adjusting things, leaving notes. Sometimes he'd be there for just a few minutes, other times he'd stay for nearly the entire displacement period. He never spoke, never tried to communicate directly, just did his work and vanished before the displaced object returned. I started leaving questions for him on whiteboards, stuff like, "Why are you here?" and "What happens to me?" But he never answered. Then on September 27th, everything changed. I'd set up another test with a goldfish in a sealed container, and like clockwork, future me appeared in the lab right on schedule. But this time, he did something different. He walked directly to my computer, plugged in a USB drive I'd never seen before, and started uploading files. I watched through the security monitor in real time, feeling like a voyeur spying on myself. Future me worked fast, typing commands I didn't recognize, accessing folders I didn't know I had. When he was done, he pulled out the USB drive, walked over to my desk, and left it there with another note. Then he looked directly at the camera, held up 5 fingers, and mouthed the word "sorry." The note said, "Don't open this until October 1st, 5 p.m. exactly, trust me." I spent the next 4 days obsessing over that USB drive, turning it over in my hands, debating whether to follow the instructions. October 1st arrived, and I sat at my desk watching the clock tick toward 5 p.m. At exactly 4:59, I plugged in the USB drive and opened the single file it contained, a video labeled "For Ryan." October 1st. The video showed future me, sitting in what looked like the same lab but more advanced, with equipment I didn't recognize. "Ryan, if you're watching this, then everything's going according to plan," he said, his voice rough and exhausted. "I need you to listen carefully and not freak out, which I know is impossible because I remember being you right now. The time displacement machine works, but not the way you think it does." He paused, rubbing his face with both hands. "You're not sending things backward in time, you're creating a loop, a closed causal circle where past and future exist simultaneously." My stomach dropped as I processed what he was saying. When you displace an object, you're opening a window that connects 2 points in time. And here's the kicker. That window goes both ways. I'm not from your future in the traditional sense. I'm from a different timeline, a branch that split off when you first activated the machine. In my timeline, I didn't have anyone to guide me. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes that cost me everything. His voice broke, and I saw tears running down his face. The machine became unstable, created a cascade failure that tore a hole in space-time right here in Portland. Hundreds of people died, Ryan, including our kids. I've spent the last 8 years trapped in this loop, living the same scenarios over and over, trying to find a way to prevent the disaster. And I finally figured it out. I can't save my timeline, but I can save yours by making sure you don't make the same mistakes I did. The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. The video continued with detailed instructions on how to safely dismantle the machine, which components to destroy, and how to erase all my research. He explained that every test I'd run had strengthened the connection between our timelines, and that if I ran just one more displacement, the barrier would collapse completely. In 3 days, on October 4th at 2:17 a.m., there's going to be a power surge in your neighborhood, he said. If the machine is still operational, it'll activate automatically, and the cascade will begin. The video ended with him staring at the camera, looking more broken than any person I'd ever seen. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process everything: the loops, the alternate timeline, the deaths. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as an elaborate hoax, but I'd seen him in my lab, I'd used his calculations. I'd watched him move through my space like a ghost haunting his own past. I had 72 hours to tear it all down and walk away. I spent that night going through all my security footage, looking for clues I'd missed. In dozens of clips, I found tiny details that confirmed his story, tools appearing in places I hadn't left them, coffee cups multiplying, even my own handwriting changing slightly on certain notes. He'd been here all along, nudging me, guiding me, trying to save a timeline that wasn't even his own. The next morning, October 2nd, I started dismantling the machine. It took me hours to disconnect all the electromagnetic coils, drain the cooling system, and carefully remove the quantum field generators. Every component I took apart felt like I was killing a dream, destroying the one thing that had given my life purpose. But every time I thought about stopping, I remembered the look on his face when he mentioned the kids dying. By October 3rd, the machine was completely disassembled, all the critical parts boxed up in my garage. At 2:17 a.m. on October 4th, I was sitting in my living room, wide awake and terrified. The power surge hit right on schedule, every light in the house flickering, and I heard a loud electrical pop from the garage. I ran out there to find scorch marks on the concrete floor where the machine had stood, the smell of ozone thick in the air. If I hadn't taken it apart, if I'd ignored the warning, that surge would have activated it, and everything he'd described would have come true. I found one last note in my lab the next morning, tucked under my keyboard where I'd definitely find it. Thank you for listening, for being braver than I was. You just saved thousands of lives, including your own. The loop is closed now, the timelines are separating, and I can finally rest. Take care of those kids, Ryan. Be the father I never got to be. It was signed with my signature, but slightly different. The way handwriting changes over years of use. I never saw future me again after that. I kept the USB drive and the notes hidden in a safe deposit box, the only proof that any of it really happened. I did call Linda and we're talking again, actually working on being friends for the kids' sake. I got a job teaching physics at Portland Community College. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills and I get summers off. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't what happened, it's what didn't happen. In some other timeline, some other version of me is living through the nightmare, watching the cascade failure, seeing the deaths. He's stuck in that loop, reliving his mistakes over and over, sacrificing everything to save a version of himself who'll never even know his name. I'm one of the lucky ones. I got a warning, a second chance. A future me willing to sacrifice his own existence to fix my timeline. I still have all the components in my garage, carefully labeled and boxed. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I go out there and look at them, wondering what would happen if I put it all back together. Would he appear again, older and more desperate, with new warnings about new disasters? The temptation is always there, lurking in the back of my mind like an itch I can't scratch. But then I think about my kids sleeping safely in their beds, about all the people in Portland who don't know how close they came to dying. And I leave those boxes exactly where they are. Because the scariest thing about time travel isn't that it's impossible. It's that it works, and some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. I know that now, and somewhere out there in another timeline, another version of me is learning the same lesson. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride, guys. If this story messed with your head as much as it messed with mine, smash that like button and subscribe to Time Traveling Stories for more mind-bending tales that'll keep you up at night. Drop a comment below telling me what you'd do if your future self showed up with a warning. Would you listen, or would you think you could do better? Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next reality-breaking story. And remember, sometimes the best way to change the future is to leave it the hell alone.